Just to introduce myself, my name is Malek. I am, I started something called BFM Radio about 12 years ago. I have now sort of moved on from radio. I still have, I still own BFM, part of BFM Radio, but my interests have now gone on from radio to personal finance and financial wellness. And that's the reason why I started a company called Fi Life. And basically, what Fi Life does is it does this horrible word called life insurance, right? But I think it's horrible because it's very confusing. The industry has made it very, very complicated. So I was one of those, I guess, victims of the complications and so on. So I said, look, life can be much simpler. So maybe we make life insurance back to its original, very, very simple form. Just to say, look, can we go back to basics, please? And let's do life insurance for life insurance. Let's not buy insurance for investments. I'll go into that later. Now I like to talk about education, about sort of particularly for parents, right? Personal finance for parents. I think we have a few things that we all worry about. First, I guess, we used to worry about ourselves and before, whether we will retire well, etc. But the moment that baby comes along, we have more than ourselves to worry about. We have to worry about our children, whether it's 1 or 2 or 5. It's something that something we have to worry about. So I think when we talk about parents, when we want to, parents have a special set of needs, financial needs, and a lot of those needs revolve around their children. First, of course, all the expenses of like sort of toddlers and things like that, the diapers, the food, and and the copious amounts of wet wipes that we have to go through. But beyond that, I think we also have to worry about their education. And I think that's the topic for today, really, is how to do the education. So for those of you, we joined the parents group, the Malaysian Community for Parents and homeschooling, simply because we want to get in touch with you and share experiences together. And I think it's not going to be just me talking today. I know 1 or 2 of you from the Facebook group, etc. So I'm gonna I've asked some of you to come specially so I can ask you questions. But I'll start with basically an introduction about sort of education, right? So I put out a poll on Monday. I think the first thing I did was to say, hey, would you like an overseas education for your children? And if so, if money was not really an object, you can afford it, where would you send your children to? And if you for university, and I guess I'm just putting up a slide where what the results were as of a certain time. I'm sure there were more votes after that, but at the cutoff point, essentially, we are quite traditional. Our traditional countries that we go to, the fact that we used to be a British colony, still is in our DNA, right? So most of us said that we like to send them to the UK, and then other parts of the British Empire, which is Australia, New Zealand is second most. Interestingly, and I'm sure the private universities in Malaysia are happy to hear this, that we also place good emphasis on sort of having a private or twinning arrangement in Malaysia with some of the the transplant universities are in Malaysia right now. I guess the likes of Monash, the likes of Taylor's. Taylor's actually a homegrown brand, and so on. And there's also the Malaysian Public University, our University Malaya, etc. But what I find interesting is that there's becoming an added realization that there are other countries where there are options. I'm very gratified by this, right? I mean, I think Germany was one that was put up, not by me. I didn't put Germany as part of the options, but a lady called Malek. Singapore has been a big talent sounds that come in from Singapore. I mean, they give a lot of scholarships. They come to Malaysia and give a lot of scholarships to Malaysians who study in Singapore, of course, in the hope that they become Singaporeans. And that's exactly what has happened. I think there's about 700,000 Malaysians in Singapore right now. So contributing to the economy here. So that's a smart soft power move by Singapore. Canada also got its fair share of votes. USA is not high on the list. I was mildly surprised by that. I'm not sure whether the guns, Trump, the combination of guns, Trump, and color, sort of like the COVID situation right now in the US added to that. USD normally would have been a little bit higher, but again, it's also been people do know that it's quite expensive. So I think that has climb down the ranks a little bit compared to maybe, I think, sometime if we take about 2-3 years ago, I think the US will be higher. The other folks that actually put up options like let my child choose their own path. Some say Taiwan and People's Republic of China. And there's one that I put, no thanks, university is overrated. Very small minority. Most of us really want to sort of, if we had an option of overseas education, we like them to go out, and the traditional hunting grounds of UK, Australia is very, very high on the list. So that was your votes. Let's go to the next question. How much does it cost? And this is the crazy thing. So, I was trying to build up a sort of an insurance calculator, and in the process of doing so, I had to find out what the university expenses was around, the different countries. I also had to do this for myself. My daughter went to Canada yesterday, and I remember going to her about 3 years ago and said, "Hey, sweetheart, what you have a choice of these universities. These are the costs, and I'm giving you a budget of X amount. Where from this budget, figure out where you can go." And then she said, and then it ruled out, actually, interestingly, it ruled out the USA. I said to her, look, because it's 1.1 million ringgit for the US. It's roughly about 50,000 US, 50 to 60,000 US in tuition fees per year. And then you add another 20,000, it's about 80,000 US. Multiply by 4, 320,000, multiply by 3, multiply by another 4, roughly, 4 years, maybe you can do it in 3.5 years. That's roughly about 1.1 million. So that was, I said, look, it's undergrad can be good, but not that good. So I just said, unless you manage to get into an Ivy League, I'm not going to entertain US at all. In the end, she opted for Canada. Canada's numbers are not here, but Canada is more along the lines of Australia. It's slightly more expensive than Australia, but I think it was manageable. Here we are. There was also comments on Facebook group. Some people were a bit like, "Wow, Australia is more expensive than the UK." Yeah, it's becoming more so. Interestingly, UK used to be more expensive than Australia, but now Australia has more than caught up. I think also because of living expenses, and I thought also because the sterling, the pound, has reduced significantly from before as compared to other currencies. So, but the Australian dollar remains strong. So I think that there's some factor to that. So generally, for the like for like, degree for degree, Australia is more expensive than UK. And then we have Japan, which is, I think, tuition's less. Singapore is also not that cheap, but I think in Singapore, what happens is that there's a lot of scholarships available, especially for Malaysians. They like Malaysians, so there's a lot of scholarships, and that's how they entice us to become, our children to become Singaporean. And then you have some Nordic countries. Germany has free tuition. So all this, the cost really is your living expenses. Nordic countries, the same thing as well, free tuition. The only issue is language. Germany, you need to at least spend first year learning German. In some of the Nordic countries, such as Sweden, Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, you can have free tuition. Some courses are in the Nordic languages, some are in English. So I think there are some options, there are a lot of details there. Malaysia, private universities without any scholarships and things like that, was about 140,000 in tuition fees, and we just assume maybe 1,000 ringgit a month in terms of, maybe 800 ringgit a month in terms of like tuition. If you were to live nearby, that can be your living expenses. And Taiwan as well can be quite cheap. I think it's free tuition as well, and is not the tuition and living expenses are quite low. So that's the kind of like the landscape for fees. The crazy thing is that when you look at this, is that it's some are in the not just it's no longer 5 figures anymore. You can't find anything with 5 figures, even in Malaysia, if it's a private university, if it's a public university, of course. But for private institutions, sort of our traditional hunting ground is in the high 6 figures, right? We're talking about at least about 500,000 to 600,000 just for the traditional hunting ground of UK and Australia. There's some mitigation. How can you reduce your cost? And I think things like twinning does help it. Doing for a course. So this, we had a course, for example, a course for a degree in Australia, a cost for, in a way, an Australian degree fully, I guess, if you're fully in Malaysia, doing maybe a Monash University, complete 3+0, that means 3 years in Malaysia, none in Australia, degree in Malaysia. And then you have a cost for 2+1 degree, meaning 2 years in Malaysia and 1 overseas. And just assuming the tuition fee, there's a rate of increase 2%, living cost of 4%. I think if you do it all in Australia, it's almost 2.5 times the price if you were to do it completely. If you do it in Australia, 2.5 times more than completely than you do it in Malaysia. So I think that's that's the nice thing about, I guess, the twinning movement that happened, I guess, in the 90s and the 2000s. I think we saw a lot of Australian universities coming in, and not just Australia. Now we have Nottingham as well in Malaysia. So a lot of universities, a number of universities are doing that in Malaysia. I think that really, really helps. And I think, for those parents who are sort of do treasure that sort of independence, when you send your kids overseas, the biggest thing the biggest thing that motivates some of us to do that is the fact that your kids are completely on their own, and they have to fend for themselves. They have to find their own food. They have to find their own lodgings. They have to find their own friends, roommates, and so basically they have to learn to live life by themselves. And I think for us, as parents, we have in a way we have to let go and let them make their own mistakes, so long as they're not serious ones. And so if you do appreciate that kind of it's hard to do that in even within Malaysia, even if it's another part of Malaysia like Penang or whatever, and you're in KL, there's still that ability to go home with a 3-hour drive, right? But what if you're in somewhere overseas? There's still, of course you can still take that flight, but they have to fend themselves for most of the time. So I think for those of us who like that kind of to build up that sort of resilience, independence, I think the +1 can be a really, really good option. And it kind of mitigates a little bit, so that therefore you take 2 years, you take out the living cost. Sometimes the tuition cost actually is also lower, even if you take out even if you were to do the tuition costs can be lower, and therefore you just have to figure out the living cost for the last year. So that's taking out the living cost for the first 2 years can be substantive savings. So you're talking about some 230,000 220,000 ringgit saving from doing a 3+0 degree. So at least they have 1 year, and maybe post degree they can work, if they can find a permit to work and so on, they can have that independence, not just for 1 year but for longer than 1 year. So I think that's a big plus during this training thing, as just a way of mitigating the different costs. The parents out there who have figured this out, that means they have done the unusual route of saying, look, I'm going to send my kids to Taiwan, or I'm going to send my kids to Germany. The tuition fees is 0, and I managed to find this, that, the other. I think it'd be great, because I think that'd be wonderful to share if you have that, because there are other parents here who would love to have an insight. I'm sure for some of us, for me, definitely when one of my colleagues mentioned Norway, I was like, wow, Norway is the hive of innovation. They came up with companies like Telenor that now owns Digi. So, and there's and there's a lot of innovation coming out of there. In Finland, you have Nokia. Sweden, you have the Volvos of the world. I think WhatsApp originated from one of the Nordic countries, if I'm not mistaken. I'm quite curious about sort of Norwegian and Scandinavian courses for my children. Germany, yes, but what is, you have to learn the German language. Any parents out there who have not done the sort of tried and tested route and have done the unusual, the road less traveled route this year? I like to ask Brian. So Brian was my ex-colleague at BFM, but he is also a very he's been recruiting before he joined BFM. I think he was basically a recruiter. He recruits on behalf of his clients from an executive search firm that he owns, and he recruits on behalf of sort of blue chip clients. And I just wanted to get Brian's perspective Brian has a daughter who's 12 years old now. And I want to get Brian's perspective on when he does recruitment, whether an overseas education is seen as necessary for to get a good job, right? Our recruiters are his clients, the blue chip companies, looking for overseas education as a criteria, or are they looking for something else? Brian, over to, what's your thoughts on that?
I think that you've got to look at it from different levels. You will find that if you and so I recruit middle and senior level. So years ago, I used to recruit at a more junior level. What you would find is the following. If you look at today's workforce, companies are looking for diversity. So they would want to take a variety of people. But having said that, however, you will find very distinct types of people that they pick. And subconsciously, they will end up picking the overseas graduate in general compared to the local graduate for certain jobs. So overseas graduate, the the general stereotype of the graduate that comes from the US or from who studied in Australia or studied in the UK, much more confident, much more articulate, much more outgoing, very comfortable with cross-cultural, uh, uh, um, multicultural environments because of their exposure. By, by, by default, however, for certain specific roles, and I know companies that do this, for very specific roles, if they want just hardworking people to follow instructions, they will pick graduates from Tar College, for example. Or, for example, if they want very good computer science graduates from local universities who will work hard but are very market ready, they'll go and pick Tar College people. Now, I am, and I was talking to Malek earlier about this, my whole thinking about foreign education has shifted completely. Now, to give you an idea, I only studied in Malaysia for 2 years, only for Standard 1 and Standard 2. After that, from 8 to 18, I studied in Singapore, and then after that, I did university in Australia. And I did all 3 years in Australia. At that time, and that framed me, that allowed me to get good jobs. And I can tell you that I was picked over other people who had much better grades for one of my jobs, which I did really, really well at. And I did well because of all the things that made me a good overseas graduate. Interpersonal skills, intellectual agility. And I remember my boss used to say, yeah, you think so differently. You think out of the box. You are able to get along with our partners, and that was very important for me to get promotions and all that. Because I worked for a Swiss German company. Our partners were all European, so Austrian, Swiss, and so forth. At that time, I think that was very, very important. That was the main reason I succeeded. Also, the Singapore education work ethic, that hard work.
So what you're saying is that, I guess what you're saying is that I think the kind of things that we look for, some of the reasons why we send our children out, I was saying earlier, is that, they develop that resilience, the independence, kind of like, they have to encounter new people from new cultures and a very different culture, the rough and ready Australian, who like very straightforward, direct, and then the sort of, and then, and so you have to contend with that kind of like environment. I remember going to Britain, going to UK, and learning sarcasm, right? Now, I had to learn sarcasm because otherwise I couldn't survive. I spent my first year not understanding the humor and so on. And now when I look, and I remember looking at British comedy before I went to the UK, and now after coming back, now I understand British humor, right? And I can participate in British humor. And that gives you a slightly added dimension. So when you're talking to a Brit, you are able to relate to them and they can relate to you, kind of thing. So I guess this is a kind of like the soft skills. But is that really now in this day and age, as you think, are those kind of experiences, that resilience and all that, is it worth paying that 6 figures for? I mean, is it worth paying $500,000 to go to Australia or the UK to get those kind of skills, interpersonal skills, that new environment, resilient skills, and so on? So I voted with my feet so far, and I sent my daughter to Canada yesterday to get exactly the same thing. But I wonder whether you, as a recruiter, Brian, is that as important as before?
Okay, so I have a 12-year-old, and I've already been, and I said my thinking has shifted tremendously, because one of the things is, so I've given, as part of giving back, I've probably given talks in 30 over universities in Malaysia, public and private. Okay, MBA classes, undergraduate classes as well. My thoughts are as follows, and in fact, for my daughter, that's kind of the way I'm trying to skew her mind. I'm sort of trying to psycho her in that way. If you go to a top-notch campus, foreign campus in Malaysia. So when I say top notch, I mean the Nottinghams, the Heriot Watts, the Readings, the Monash University. They have proper campuses. They are not shop houses. They have proper academic structures. So I'll give you an example, and I'll do a deep dive for somebody, for all of you, in terms of, say, one example, Nottingham University, because I really looked at it, because I've given a couple of talks there, undergraduate and MBA class. If somebody is, if the lecturer fails someone in Nottingham or gives him a distinction, each lecturer has to do a half-page report. That report and the examination papers are sent to the UK for peer review. So peer review means not another Nottingham lecturer, but at equivalent level. So it's whether it's Manchester, Leeds, or whatever. So the standards are exactly the same, even though it's a local campus. Now the second, so academic standards, that's where it is. So they've got good campuses, proper campuses. They've got good academic standards. The lecturers tend to be mixed. They have UK lecturers, they have local lecturers as well. The lecturers, most of them have PhDs and stuff like that. So it's not dumbing down in any way. The third thing, which is very important, is campus diversity. If you look at their student body, you basically have a combination of people from all over the world. They are not just Malaysian students. Now, why is that? Because Nottingham has a China campus, a Dubai campus, a Malaysia campus, and a UK campus. So essentially, they are encouraged to go around at least and spend a year away from whichever their base campus is. So you find a mix of students. Now, from a cost perspective, 3 years in Nottingham cost you 140,000 ringgit. And that includes fees to go in your second year, to send your kid to the UK or whichever other campus that they want to go to, at no extra cost. You only pay for living expenses. Now, for me, when you come back, so what is the return on investment on your 140K or whatever, plus living expenses, your 200K or 220? Basically, your kid is going to come back and start off at 2,500 to 3,000 for a non-engineering type job. For an IT or engineering, probably 3,000 to 4,000. If you spend $500,000, it's exactly the same thing. You spend your 750,000 or whatever. If you go to Australia now, when you add everything up, that's how much it's actually going to cost. Australia has just become so expensive. So for me, from an undergraduate level, I don't think there is a return on investment. However, I would spend the money on a master's degree program for the child. So I asked, and I only would say that for a blue chip MBA. So, and I'll use an MBA as an example. I told one of my friends to send to, because a year at INSEAD will cost you about 700,000 all in. So fees, travel, everything, 700,000 ringgit. And he said, and he could, I mean, he's a professional guy. He's not rich, but he had enough, and he saved enough money for his kids to be educated properly. So he said, Brian, I sent my kids to the UK. I've done my part, but now my son wants me to spend another 700,000. At that time, he was in Singapore. He was 29 years old, earning 5,000 plus ringgit. He is an engineer by training. He went to, I think, Middlesex or something for his, UCL for his first degree. And I said, send your son, there will be a return. And I said, even if he doesn't come back to Malaysia, he will get those salaries in management consulting or something like that. He came back to Malaysia, and first year out, so he's 31 years old, 300 plus thousand ringgit package from a German company. So the father was just over the moon. He said, wow, I can return, my return on investment is literally 2 years on that INSEAD. So from a blue chip master's degree, there is a return on investment. I think so anyway, because you go to middle management, your whole career path for that that person's career path is a completely different career path. So and that's my take. That's empirical evidence. I'll just give you actual examples.
And Brian, I really appreciate that. I can also give an example for myself as well. When I came back, I did an MBA at a blue chip organization, and blue chip university. And then when I came back, what happened was that I was in consulting, and yes, I was earning about 20,000 ringgit a month at the age of 28, 29, right? And then after that, even when I was employed by a corporate in Malaysia, I was put under not expat, but one below expat, right? Because you are the kind of, they call it the local talent, future leaders and things like that. So even though I was earning more than some of my actual bosses, right? Because your career track is a very different career track, right? So your point, Brian, coming back to your point, basically, sort of for undergrad, be pragmatic about it, right? Be pragmatic about it. If you can do that twinning things and get the same experience, you get that 1 year. I think Felicia was saying, Felicia, I didn't know, Felicia. That's amazing, right? You studied in Nottingham. I didn't even know that, and you're my colleague. Look at how did I recruit you? I didn't even look at your university, right?
So Felicia, I just did a huge sale for Nottingham University, right? They should pay me.
Yeah, and I didn't even look at her university credentials. I just recruited her because of her attitude, her things like that. And I guess she said in her second year, you went off to the UK. Felicia, you want to give a little bit of kind of like your experience? You said your parents, you convinced your parents convinced you?
Actually, I convinced my parents. I usually tell them what I want. So I did tell them that, see, there's an option to go for the exchange. I think I knew about it before enrolling to Nottingham. So I thought that was a really plus point, because that means that my parents could definitely afford sending me overseas with the Malaysian tuition fees despite going to the UK. And I think, like what Brian mentioned, you can also choose to go to the other campus. So some of my peers that actually went to both China and the UK, they just split half and half. So it's completely new, brand new cultural experiences. And I think that definitely helps, gives you a much wider world perspective, being in different campuses. So I think that is definitely a plus point. And in general, as Brian mentioned as well, I think the quality of lectures there, professors there are definitely, there's such a quality to it. And I enjoyed my experience there. It felt, like I said, some of them are even better than the ones that I met in the UK, actually.
Really interesting. Sometimes the quality of the academic staff that comes out here are kind of better. I'm very heartened to hear you say that. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Felicia. Really appreciate it. Please stay on, Brian. If
Yep.
I'm going to go and talk a little bit about now on the area of how to fund it. Right? Supposing you're being pragmatic, but you still need to fund it. So I'm going to go back to the issue of funding. So we've talked a little bit about sort of, sorry, we just, I lost my screen. Where am I? Sorry, let me start again. Share screen. And I'm looking at there we go. All right, so we talked about how much it costs, and and remember, if it's a medical degree, that's even worse. Firstly, because it's basically about between 5.5 to 6 years. And is a more expensive degree as a whole, right? So that becomes very expensive. So these are some numbers that we've developed for you. And how much? So when you go to the US, you're 1.1 million. Let's put it into some quantifiable things. How much do you have to save a month to achieve the targeted amount? If you don't follow Brian's advice, and go for that, for that twinning and so on, how much would it cost elsewhere? So let's say the total cost of USA is 1.1 million. Supposing you decide from day one that the moment your child is born, you say, yep, I'm going to make sure that at least whatever it is, I can afford the most expensive education that out there, and that's USA. The moment your child is born, for that just one child, and not talking about your 3 or 4 kids, you're just talking about one kid, you need to save about 2,300 ringgit a month and put it away. Be very disciplined about it for the next 18 years to afford 1.1 million a month. This is assuming that you can earn a pretty decent rate of return, not your fixed deposit return. You can earn about 8% per annum, and education costs only inflation of only 3%. It has been quite more than that generally. It's been more like 5%, but let's say inflation rate will reduce because of currently I think that it's unsustainable to go at 6% every year. So let's say that reduces at 3% and you're able to get a average return of 8%. You need to put away 2,300 the moment your child is born. If you decide to start saving only when the child is 6 years old or 7 years old, that number doubles. Basically, if you leave it 6 years later till they're about 6 years old, the number goes up to 4,006. You have to put away every month, right? So that's the kind of like it is. So the first thing is it is a big number. 1.1 million is a big number, and to be able to put out away anywhere between 2,003 to 4,006 for one child requires quite a big high disposable income. Dual income parents, one of whom is at least earning more than 10 to 15,000, that kind of thing, to be able to get there. Australia and UK is less. So I think the same numbers is how much you have to put away a month is 1,250 or so for Australia, or if you left it till they're 6 years old, double that. So UK about the same. Malaysia, if you wanted to save for 140,000, is actually is manageable 300 or 600 if you started at 6 years old, right? So these is translating this huge six-figure numbers. It seems unsurmountable, but we can, in a way, sort of put it into sort of monthly terms to be able to do this. At this stage, I would just like to ask a gentleman called Kevin Neo, who I know is online, to come on the call. Just to, in a way, Kevin just had a baby about 6 months ago during MCO, and I wonder which bracket is he looking at saving for his new baby. Kevin, over to you. Let me share screen first. You can.
Thank you for asking, Malek.
Sorry.
My son is about 8 months now. Basically, about 2 days ago, just talking to my wife, I said we need to save about at least 1,200 if we want to prepare some money that is sufficient for him to send him to UK for him to study in his tertiary study.
Okay, so you're in that bracket, that UK bracket of trying to save about 500,000 by the time he's 18 years old.
Yeah, but my projection is more conservative. It's not 8% because I think it's rather difficult to sustain 8% over the next 17 years. So I was looking at about, I think, 6%.
Okay. All right. So you take more conservative. The good news is for everyone on this call, Kevin is a licensed financial planner, and Kevin has always, when we do webinars in my capacity as Fi Live and BFM, Kevin has always been very, very helpful in terms of contributing his time to sort of in a way explain financial principles. So Kevin, is it, when I showed the numbers just now, if you start in 6 years' time, the number would double, right?
Yeah.
And so your advice must be that you start as early as possible, right?
Yes, indeed.
What if you have 2 children? Is it just a question of just multiplying the 2?
The burden will double, but it actually, even one child only, is not as simple and straightforward like what we see in the table, because by the time they are about to go to primary school, one decision the parents usually have to make is, do we send to the public school or a private school? Because that will again put an additional strain on our cash flow.
Okay. And what would make your decision one way or the other for that? Is it purely a financial decision?
These are things that you cannot just look at numbers alone, because most parents that I have had a conversation with, we all would like that our children have the exposure and also the connection with different people. So therefore, even though it's quite stressed, parents would generally still want to try their best to provide a better one so that our child will have a better head start. Therefore, but the only thing is that the cash flow will be quite a heavy strain, especially when they are 7 and above. So we need to start planning. The benefit of starting early is that for the tertiary funds, it will get easier. And then you have, at least we started something, and then the second stage will be a little bit more less stressful.
So Kevin, I mean, how are you, in a way, just for yourself, what are you investing in to be able to get that 6% return that you have projected for yourself? What are you doing for yourself to be able to that? What securities?
Okay, so this is just my personal planning, so it's not really constituting an advice. Try to diversify. This is my principle of making investment. So I have a few pot actually. The first pot is I'm buying some blue chip share. All right, and then the second one is I basically just put the money into a portfolio of unit trust funds, and then also a little bit in robo advisor platforms.
Okay. All right. So I think what you're aiming for is a portfolio that tries to aim 6%. I think when you go for that blue chip things, you might get higher than that. When you go for a mix or unit trust, you might get somewhere there, average that. And I guess with robo advisors, you should get some also about sort of the returns range. But if they go well, I think some of the portfolio returns, if you just back calculate,
Depending on the risk index.
Yeah. So yeah, and so for what about property, Kevin? I mean, I know a lot of my peers, and certainly when I went to university, a lot of my friends' parents were like, they always said there was this thinking, oh, I'm going to buy this property, and and if my as soon as and the kids usually about 4 or 5 years old, I can sell the property if I want to, and buy for my and so sell the property and pay for the education. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, there's some traditional thoughts around those lines.
These plans, I would say it works pretty well for maybe my parents' generation or a generation before that. But if we look at the cash flow perspective, right? When we have a property that is preparing for our child education fund, generally the property has got to be rented out for the first 10 to 18 years, right? So the problem is, what if we cannot rent it out to cover the mortgage? And when, like I say, when you link back to the primary and secondary schooling days, the additional cash flow, let's say coupled with the fact that your property is now vacated, then there will be a double whammy hit. So for that matter, I would say that it's not for me. And then by the time our child is about to further their study, the timing also must be right that we are able to liquidate and sell the property at the right price that we want. So that means there's quite a many combination of unknown and factors that are actually beyond our control, and therefore it's not for me.
Okay, all right. So yeah, so I guess and property is very illiquid, and the timing it can make or break you, right? So
Yes.
that's something that I think. So for parents out here, so if for the parents on this forum, if you had, I guess what you're saying is, I think what we got from Brian was be pragmatic. Figure out what if figure out other options like Germany, learn language and so on, try twinning, and so on. What are your aspirations for your own son, Kevin? What do you want him to?
There are things that is still way too early for me to have hope. So I can only focus on what I can do to ensure that he has a safe environment growing up, and whatever I think it's important for me to prepare him to learn, I would do so. And as far as what should he be studying or where should he be going, I think these are things that we have to monitor and observe, and only fair that it maybe I would, for me, my plan is to involve him in the decision-making process so that he will be hands-on in his own research about what course he wants to study or what country he wants to go to. And then we can also, it's a process of us preparing them to be independent. Actually, not after we send them away, but actually started way before we buy the etiquette. That's my philosophy and idea.
So let me come to one point, right? So we've done one portion, which is basically we say, okay, we're going to put away 1,000 every month for our child to to go to a UK university and so on. Just make sure that they might have all the options. Now, there's another element. I think that's why I certainly worried about this a lot, because I was the sole breadwinner in my family, and I remember 15 years ago I was like, what if something happens to me, right?
Yeah.
What then happens? So that what if, that means, if the breadwinner, I fall ill, or I fall, I get a car accident and things like that. How do you, how do I hear a lot of people saying, oh, I'm buying an insurance policy for my baby or for my kid. But actually, but actually you're trying to buy an insurance policy for yourself. How have you figured out in a way, how to protect against something happening to you or your wife? Does your wife work, Kevin? Your
Yeah,
wife works?
she's working.
Okay.
Yes.
So how do you structure that kind of thing to make sure that the calamities, you're covered against calamities, something happening? And try, don't touch wood, nothing happens, but if you have to always worry about
Especially in this year, we all learn that there are things that is beyond our control, and sometimes we will have to say goodbye to this world earlier than we want to. And therefore, it's very important for me to ensure that if something happened to me, my family living expenses, their lifestyle will not be suddenly disrupted to the very bad extent. Actually, before my son was born, I already tried to maximize and add on a few more term life policies to cover my life, so that if I were to say goodbye to my family too early, at least I know that for the next few years, the lifestyle is gonna be, the boat won't be rocked too much. And as far as the education fee is concerned, I have already included that when I apply for how much of sum assured I should be getting for myself.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Kevin. Really, really appreciate that. And for those parents who, I always believe that people should have financial planners who have their own kind of like, in their own kind of like lifestyle. Meaning, for example, Kevin has a new baby and so on. I think, the best kind of clients he can advise, and he can advise anyone for sure, but I think it's extra comfort for parents, parents with newborn babies or young children, to talk to financial planners who have had babies, who have gone through, or to understand, right, where they're coming from. So I think I always believe in matching the profile of the financial planner with the profile of their clients. So if you need specific advice, Kevin is a licensed financial planner. It's not this sort of like selling insurance. No, he doesn't do that. He actually represents you. He does charge a fee, but he represents you. But that first call, not an issue. Kevin, thank you very much. If there's anyone who wants your contact, I will pass it to them directly. Thanks. Appreciate it, Kevin.
Welcome.
So going back to, let me look through some of the questions. Jen, I'm a scholar student. Recently, my girl is given the opportunity for Singapore Nanyang Girls' School. A lot of requirements such as academic and co-curriculum. Yes, Singapore want our children. That's for sure. I live in Singapore. They got me, but they want our children, and so on. Okay, so let me just cut. Now I think we're approaching. If there's any questions, please feel free just to feel free to ask on the chat group. I will also I will start to conclude. How much is enough to cover family expenses if anything happened to the breadwinner? That comes from Karen. There's a question by Karen. Karen's question is, how much is enough to cover family expenses if anything happened to the breadwinner? And I think Karen, the answer is this. Basically, what you have to do is you have to just figure out what does your family expenditure is if you're not around, to the breadwinner. If the breadwinner is not around, what do they need to spend things on? Basically, you need to know what your family needs are, right? Are you paying for a private education right now? How much does it cost to put food on the table with the provisions? How much does it cost? Do you have a mortgage, and so on? I would say that in generally, if you're living in Klang Valley, I'm not sure, Karen, where you stay, but if you're in the Klang Valley, it is rarely the case that it's less than 1 million, really, because basically the amount of living in Kuala Lumpur is very, very expensive. And you already saw, if you wanted to have even a local university education, that's 150,000, right? So if you have 2 children, that's already 300,000. So 700,000 for everything else. So at least there. Harbin has put down a life insurance calculator there for you. The good news is that, depending on your age, some insurance policies can be very, very expensive, because what they do is they combine investment within it. So, but if you just buy term life, which is to say, if something happens to me, I want this amount given to my family, that can be very, 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 very good value. I mean, we're talking about for 32, we're talking about less than 100 ringgit for a 32-year-old woman. even with our own policies, right? With Fire Life, right? Basically, it's just 32 ringgit a month. 100 ringgit a month for a 32-year-old woman. So that's the kind of pricing that we're talking about, less than 100 ringgit for a million ringgit policy. So have a look at that calculator that we've put out, that Harbin has put out, and put in kind of like your needs. We ask you what your mortgage is, what kind of education. We even ask we even ask what kind of education you want for your children, and then estimate a little bit of your family expenses, and then you can come up to a certain number. So let's go through how did I plan for my invest fees. This is from Kate, asking me how do I plan to invest my university fees. Actually, Kate, my daughter's education has been paid for by the American stock market. I invested in the American American stock market about as of about 2004 2005. It's been in the American stock market for about 15 years. And honestly, that all my three children's education have already been paid by investing in that stock market. That stock market return, I calculated my returns from investing. It was about 11.5% per annum average return per year, which means that any money invested doubles almost every 7 years. So with that early investment, basically all my three children's education has been paid off by investing early and so on. And actually I was it was slightly different for me. For me it wasn't so much of a savings plan, but I had a small lump sum that I had, and I just kind of like sort of invested in a basket of stocks, like what Kevin is doing. He invested in blue chip stocks. I wouldn't recommend buying individual stocks for people who are not experienced in it. There are other kinds of instruments that you can buy. You can buy as a unit trust, or you can buy they call it exchange traded funds, which is basically you buy the whole market. You don't depend on one company. You buy the whole market, right? So what then happens, and robo advisors are good at doing this. Robo advisors are doing about sort of buying, going through a robo advisory service and all that can get you quite sort of over the long run positive returns. And that's how my kids were. That's how I managed to send my daughter at least to Canada. I'm hoping my sons choose Germany actually still, so I can have more for my retirement. So more questions here. This is a question for Kevin. You mentioned that using your insurance sum assured to cover future investments. For parents who are making the financial decisions solely, how can you make sure it's used for investments in the right manner when you are no longer here? Is there any financial planner who can help you execute the planning? So Kevin, can you answer that? Essentially, the question is, okay, you've set up your insurance so that you are putting away money to your family, so they get a lump sum if you're no longer around. Mm-hmm. But what if? Who can execute it on your behalf, right? So I suppose that MJ is saying that he feels that he or she does not have a person who is good with numbers or good with finances that he can pass over this responsibility to.
This is a very real concern to have. I'll first answer, how do we cover the investment amount, how to make sure that it will be used and invested in the way we hope for. There's a way to prevent this. There's a way to prevent the performance of the investment from derailing our plan. For myself, when I do the calculation on how much insurance I need, I use a very, very conservative assumption. If I'm not mistaken, it's just 3% of the growth rate. So if I die yesterday, this money paid to my family hands, they will just have to put it into any FD, 2 to 3% like that. And by the time 17 years later, that amount of money will be about there already. There may be a bit of differences, but it will be very minimal already. Compared to if I assume this money will grow at 6 to 7%, and eventually it never got to grow at this rate, then that differences may be actually quite huge, the gap. So in order to minimize this risk, you can use a very, very prudent assumption, 3%, 2%, it should be safe enough. But the next question is, even though we are very conservative, the question is always go back to who is handling the money. okay, there's a chance that the person who's handling the money may actually overspend, or may actually use it as somewhere that is not your priority, because after we leave the world, we don't know what we don't really know what will happen in the world. So your family will have the discretion of making decision on how the money will be used. Then there's also a risk of scams, that this money can actually be gone overnight, or over a few seconds, or over one phone call. So if that worry is also very real, one way is to pass the money to a trust corporation. That means a trustee who will actually help you to manage the money and follow your wishes on how this money will be managed, when to pay to who, how to pay, the frequency, and what they can invest and what they cannot invest. So there's a lot of things that we can actually set in the trust deed, our wishes for the trustee to follow. But that, of course, will comes with a little bit of cost, because trust company, they do charge their trust administration fee. But when I do that, I actually included this cost into my life insurance need. So eventually, if I really leave this world, this cost will be incurred, but it will actually be paid by the life insurance proceed as well. So for me, when I do like that, it actually assists me in having a real peace of mind, knowing that if I were to leave the world, money will be there, and the money will really be there, because there's no chance this money will be mismanaged or misused. So I hope that has answered MJ's question.
Kevin, can I just give us a ballpark figure? How much does a trust deed cost to do this? And
to set up a trust is not really expensive. It can cost you about 1,500 to 2,000 plus. It depends how complicated your wishes are. All right. So if you want to have very flexible arrangement, then the letter of wishes or the trust deed will be longer. Therefore, it will be require a lot more money to set up. But typically, it will be about 2,000 to 3,000, that kind of range. What really will hurt is the trust administration fee, because that is actually charged on a yearly basis. Every year, the trustee play their role to safeguard your money. They will charge this fee. So it will be somewhere about 1%, and it's usually the larger the trust asset size is, this fee will go down. So it's a tearing down one. So you'll be starting maybe like 1% a year. Then the second tier maybe is 0.5% a year. So when we budget this into our life insurance need, actually it's not really a relevant cost anymore.
Okay. So basically, if you take, let's say, for example, 1 million sum assured, the trust will charge about 10,000 ringgit every year.
A year, yeah.
Yeah. So, but because
so for 10 years, it's only 100,000. So instead of 1.1 million, I'll just buy 1.3 million. I have more than enough to buffer also.
For them to run the trust for 10 years, that
yes.
kind of thing. Okay, great, fantastic. That's a great answer. So at least we know lah, I think for everyone. Lian Sim, there was a question, for someone not well versed in share markets, what would be the next best option? I think we heard Kevin talk about about robo-advisors as well as unit trust funds. Kevin, can you elaborate a little bit for someone who's not well versed in share markets? If they wanted to invest their education money, what should they do?
First thing, it depends on the investment objective, because that will determine how much of return you need. Secondly, if you do not have time or do not have the confidence or knowledge to do the stock picking yourself, it is actually a safe decision for you to appoint asset management company to do that for you. That will be investing through unit trust fund. But let's say you do not wish to invest through unit trust fund because your goal is just to track the overall stock market movement, then exchange traded fund will be quite a good choice for you. But you do have to know how to buy, how to open your CDS account, and how to have the discipline to execute the buy and sell decision also. As compared to unit trust, you can actually set up a regular deduction from your bank account. Of course, robo-advisor also can do that as well.
Okay. And I think for robo-advisor, yes, you can put up a monthly amount, I think, and robo-advisors buy you into those funds and depending on your risk profile. I think that's what the robo-advisors do. Basically, they look at you and they say, what do you want this for? When do you need your money by? And then they come up with a recommendation as to the kind of portfolio you should have. And then you can put in money into that portfolio. So I'm going through the list as well. There's also... So this is a very interesting one because, I recently, this is by JJ, I inquired for a life insurance quote in Malaysia. I was told by my insurance agent that it is cheaper for investment linked type compared to term life because the investment return helped me to generate cash flow. Is this true?
Would you like to answer that, Malek?
I mean, I guess I know my answer to that is because I think it's very generally speaking. I've done the math, and investment linked policies are very, very expensive for people generally. Why? Say for example, you put 1,000 a month towards your investment linked policy. For the first 6 years, that 1,000 a month. A big proportion of that, anywhere between your first year could be up to 60% of that, including the amount that you want to put for savings for your investment, is taken by sort of the agent, right? And basically for your first 6 years, a big proportion, it starts at 60, it goes down maybe to about 10 after a while, but all that, including the amount that you put into your savings, is taken out. Can you imagine buying a unit trust fund that had a sales charge of roughly 30 to 40% for the first 6 years, right? Can you imagine a unit trust with like that kind of thing? That is the kind of like the equivalent cost of buying an investment linked policy, right? That's what you're paying. So that's why it's very confusing. I personally take the view of you buy insurance for insurance and you invest for investments. Because you can, you really can just then, minimize that means that every dollar you put into investment, the only thing you pay for, maybe unit trust fund. If they usually, I would recommend that you don't buy unit trust fund with sales charge. You can get 0% from your EPF as well. You get 0% sales charge. They will charge maybe a management fee of 1.5%, right? So that's the only cost you have per year. With an investment linked policy, you have the equivalent is that you have a sales charge of double digits for the first 6 years. So that is not good. That will the best investor in the world cannot make up the returns for that. So I would recommend separating it. Buy insurance for insurance. As I said, you can get for 100 ringgit a month, you can get depending on your age, etc. You can get a 1,000,000 ringgit policy. The rest, right? The rest of that, 1,005 or to 2,005 that you want to save for your children, you can put away straight into your investments, and that you've already sort of saved money so much that way. Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll just add that insurance is purely for protection, and for investment, if we invest the money into an investment linked policy, even though the name has the wording of investment, it's actually not suitable for investment one. The money that actually goes into the fund for the first 6 years is very, very, very little. Funds actually perform 20% a year. It's only a very small amount of my money growing 20% a year. So overall, it's still very insignificant. Therefore, it's not really going to work out. But if you need it for protection, then it makes sense for you to put your money into insurance. But you got to know what kind of protection you need. I've seen parents who buy too much of protection until they got very little budget to prepare for the education fund. So sometimes when you have too much of good things, it may not be a good thing anymore.
Yeah, and also it's interesting. I also hear this a lot as well. Oh, I want to buy a life insurance policy on my child, right? I want to buy a life insurance policy for my kid. I'm like, but why are you buying a life insurance policy for your child? Because if something happens to your child, yes, we are grief, we suffer grief, we suffer this, but they have no dependents, right? No money in the world can compensate for the loss of your child. What we should buy insurance policy for is for us. We are the ones earning. Our child will suffer if we're no longer around and we don't have any money for them. So I hear that a lot, and I get a little bit upset when I guess people approach parents and say, please buy insurance policy on the life of your child. No. And then they say, I prefer the ones that they say, let's buy an education plan for your child. That's good. But and that has a life element. No, you don't want that. You don't need the life protection element. But if you want to buy an education plan, just make sure that I think you can achieve the same goals. Just make sure what the fees are. You know exactly what the fees are. And if I say, if the education plan has that 6-year kind of like fee structure, that means you're not really saving for your child. Can you imagine? Remember, I showed you the chart of the, you know, the first 6 years has, you know, if you have your, you know, that 6 years is so important, you know, when you have to save right away, all that will be taken up by commissions and so on. What you want is to be able to invest the first dollar you invest goes straight to your investment for your kid, because you have a long way to go. We have 18 years to go to save, and we have to start early. We can't start at the 6th year. We have to start in the first year. What is the difference between trust and will? Kevin?
Basically, in a very easy to understand manner, a will is to help us to pass down our asset before we have accumulated over our life. Once we pass away, a will be the tool you need in order to hand down all the asset to your whoever you would like to. Whereas a trust is actually a structure that we want to pass to someone, but not now. Maybe somewhere down the road in the future after I die, then I can put into the trust so that in the future, the trustee will help me to, at the year that I tell them to, they will bring the asset inside the trust and hand to the right beneficiary. And during the period that the trust exists, the trustee can also act on the instruction or wishes of the deceased person. Please pay my family 2,000 a month. Please pay my family 5,000 a month. And then if my child scores straight A for SPM, award them with anything. So you can set a very detailed instruction or wishes. Whereas if you do through a will, right, is that everything I have in this account give to my child. So the executor of your will just take this account and give to the child straight away. But of course, the child, if it's still minor, cannot inherit. So this thing will be passed to the surviving parents.
There's also, I'll deal with a question by Hui Shing as well. How do I rebalance my existing local insurance policies and savings plan, which I've invested over the last 15 to 18 years without increasing my already heavy monthly commitment? I'm a sole breadwinner with 2 schooling teenagers in the Klang Valley. Hui Shing, for that, it sounds like it is quite, I've seen sometimes situations like yours, and it's quite complex, right? Because you have several insurance policies. For this, I think it's worth spending time with someone who can look at all your policies and kind of like be able to come back to you with a recommendation based on your needs with your teenagers and so on. It's not an easy thing to do. I think, you know, a lot of financial planners will charge around the amount of between 2,005 to 3,005 for a really comprehensive plan, not just looking at your existing policies, but also looking at your needs and your risk profile and figure out an investment strategy. I think it's well worth spending that money to have the first conversation first with people, someone that you trust, build up that trust. But after that, I mean, to employ someone to really look at something like that, I think is well worth it. I remember I spent with my first one, with my first financial planner, I had private bankers calling me because I came across a small windfall. Private bankers calling me, and all of them were selling products, and I felt that I was being sold to all the time. And the only time when I didn't feel sold to was actually when I contacted an independent financial planner, and I could tell that that person was really not for the insurance companies, not working for insurance companies, not working for fund management companies. That person, because I was paying fees to him, and I had to pay $3,000 in fees, because I was paying him. He was my agent. He was not the other company's agent. He was my I'm his client. So because of that, I got a very comprehensive plan. And you know what? Guess what? I didn't realize, but that 3,000, the business model of this planner was to return every single commission that he got. He returned it to me, right? Because he was a fee only financial planner, and the fee that was returned to me was about 3 times the amount of was about $10,000 compared to the 3,000 I paid him. So that was how much that, even going for independent financial planner helped me, and paying a fee up front. Yes, you have to pay a fee up front. The fees are very transparent. It's not hidden in the products. That is I love that model because I know that that person works for me and doesn't work for any other fund manager or insurance company. Right, great. I'd like to conclude by having just a summary of. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much for contributing to today. I'll just like to summarize by having a summary of things. Remember, these are the kind of like the rough numbers that you need. I think Kevin is more conservative. We say 8% because maybe it's, I think I was just following the stock markets in the world generally, and Kevin's more conservative with that. But in summary, these are the things that say be pragmatic. I think what Brian says, consider free tuition countries, consider twinning. So if you have the spare cash, fine, no worries. You can, whatever, you can choose the world's your oyster. But if you don't, then, and you also have to think about your own retirement. Think about sort of this sort of the road less traveled. Brian also said something along the lines of save funds for overseas. Undergraduates you can do locally. Save funds for overseas masters and specialization. Sometimes our children don't know what they really want to do until they have had exposure at undergraduate level, right? And then they suddenly realize, oh my gosh, I really feel that I really want to do, behavioral psychology or behavioral economics or something like that. And then so they kind of like do their undergraduate degrees thinking that they want to do something else. So at least, you save some funds for a later date. That means when they really know what they want to do, then they can go for a master's and so on. We also saw the fact that, if you left it 6 years later, the amount that you need to save for the same amount of funds for your education is double. So start saving now. And the other element is there's a lot going on in the online space, online learning, online courses. And as parents, I think we just need to keep up with the developments in online learning. I think that's why the forum of the parenting forum that we have here is really, really good. I know there's a lot of other stuff as well, like politics and things like that. But if we actually sort of keep each other informed about this online learning and courses, you could. I think there's some skills, especially if it's technical skills, programming skills. A lot of these are actually learned online. There's no university of who has a monopoly on online learning. So I think this is something that you just need to keep up with, and for us to share amongst each other. For me, I guess the Fi Life team, for us, we believe very much on sort of making sure that as you save, that you also think about sort of what happens if you're no longer around. I know it's a harsh thing to say, but we have to think about it. And if you're the breadwinner, and there's no longer that breadwinner to put away that 1,500, 2,500 ringgit every month for the education. For that, I think it's good to have just pure insurance to make sure that your family gets a lump sum. The proposition is very simple. If something happens to you, your family gets 1 million ringgit, your family gets 500,000 ringgit, whatever you choose, right? And the cost of it is just the premiums. There is no cash value. That means there's no investment in it. It's just a certain amount, $1 million if something happens to you. So and it's a very clear premium, and there's no hidden fees or anything like that. So I guess for us, we come from at Fi Life, we come from the perspective of yes, do save, but do prepare. If make sure that you also have protection in case something happens. So that is how that's the role we play at Fi Life. I plan to sort of get really sort of continue with this, educating and sort of sharing financial literacy stories and financial wellness stories with parents on this forum. I think I'm going to be a very active participant here. I see some of you there already, and I look forward to joining you in some of the conversations on the threads on Facebook later on in the next few weeks and so on. So thank you very much for coming to this webinar. Appreciate your time. So there is just for those of you who are thinking of insurance side, we have a special code for you till the end of the year. It's called Parents 2020, where you can get 20% off your first year premiums. Just something for this group to take advantage of, if you feel that is something that you would like for your children. No obligation whatsoever. But there it is, Parents 2020. Okay.
Yeah, just to add on that, if you have any other questions about term life insurance or just the code, or how do you find out more about insurance, feel free to just go to www.fi.life. I think there is a chat box there. You can speak to our customer service if you have more questions about it. Yeah. So, all right, I think that's all. Thank you so much once again to Malek, to Brian earlier, and to Kevin as well. So we'll end this session tonight, and I wish all of you have a good night's rest. All right, goodbye, everyone.